One of the best things about illustration, in my opinion, is that no matter where you live in the world, if your work is good, you have a shot of working with any client all around the world. So if you live in a relatively low cost of living area of the world, South America, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, India, you could potentially build yourself a very nice life working internationally. This is a real advantage for you. It doesn't work the other way around, because let's say an illustrator lives in London, they can't work with some of the rest of the world because their cost of living is so high. And working with clients in South America, for example, there's going to be a big mismatch between how much those clients have to spend and how much that illustrator needs to pay their rent. Working internationally is a way for illustrators from certain parts of the world to really build a thriving career and, make a decent amount of money, but which they probably couldn't do working just locally. God, slippery. I've had 2 conversations recently with illustrators from Eastern Europe, one from Bulgaria, I think, and one from Ukraine. And they both told me something that I hadn't come across before, but it makes sense. They said that clients from, I think, France or the UK or US maybe, had been in touch with them specifically because they were from Eastern Europe, hoping to pay less. Well, not even hoping, expecting to pay less, which is a shame. And I think probably the blame lies at the door of websites like Upwork or Fiverr, who have trained people in higher cost of living countries, let's say, to assume that working with people from Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia or South America is cheaper. And you know what? It is. For all the people that are working on Upwork, I said the blame lies with those kinds of freelance marketplace websites, but there's no blame really. For every freelancer working in the UK or the US whose job is threatened by cheaper freelancers in lower cost of living areas, there are fantastic opportunities for the people who live in those places, who previously wouldn't have had the chance to work with international clients. It's globalization, and it started a long time before Fiverr or Upwork appeared. Previously it was things like American car companies moving their manufacturing to Mexico, for example. That's now caught up with the creative industries, and I imagine most of the people watching this have actually benefited from it at some point. It wasn't so long ago that you needed to live in a city where you had to go and show your printed portfolio to clients in real life. Imagine that. I have no problem with people choosing to work on Upwork, by the way, or Fiverr. If you need to make a living, why not use your skills and sell them on a website like Upwork or Fiverr? It's a great way to get your work around the world. But the expectation is that your work is going to be cheap, even if the work is good. So it's maybe not the way to have a long career. So if selling your work on those websites offers you a way to provide for yourself and your family, then do it. But perhaps we should see it as a short-term solution. Do it until you can afford not to do it. Once your portfolio is good and you're making a decent living, you have a foundation to build an even better career on top of that. If you spend too long working there, you'll always be positioned as a cheap gig worker, and you won't be able to break free of that if you stay on those platforms. And the working conditions aren't great for a lot of the people on there either. They possibly have to do things like working at night, depending on what time zone their clients are in. And they're also probably working really long hours to make ends meet because they're doing hourly work. The more hours they do, the more money they make. Oh, I've gone the wrong way. When you can afford to break away from it, though, and get your own portfolio website together, then you can begin to find your own clients independently. Clients who will value the work and pay you a fair fee based on the quality, not your location. Don't let clients get away with paying you less. If your work is as good as another creative from somewhere else in the world, you should be paid the same. But if you're at the start of your career or in a difficult financial situation, you can't always afford to turn clients down. So do what you have to do until you can afford to steer the ship in a better direction. I work with artists from all over the world, and I've spoken to artists from, I can't even count how many countries, people I thought I would never get to speak to, which has been great. And my advice has always been roughly the same. Charge what your work is worth to the client. Now, if you do live in a low cost of living area of the world, relatively speaking, you can probably afford to be a little bit more flexible than somebody living in London, for example. If you're working with a client who in the US who's got $800 for an illustration, and you think, oh, that's great. If you're from the Philippines, that's probably pretty good relative to where you live. For somebody in London or Paris, that might not cover their costs. If you live in a lower cost area of the world, you have more flexibility in what jobs you can accept and still be profitable. And that's a real advantage that you should be able to use to your advantage. But it's a tricky line to follow, because while you can undercut other creatives' prices, a lot of the illustration advice out there would say you should charge fair market rates and not undercut fair prices so you don't devalue the industry. Fine. But a fair price in one area of the world is different to another area. And it takes time for an artist to know what their work is worth to clients and to be able to confidently ask for that amount. I don't have any issue with an artist who can give a quote to a client that is fair for them based on where they live in the world. You can earn a great living for yourself and your family and still be a bargain for some clients in the US or UK or France or Germany, What's wrong with that? But it's hard to know how to balance that against some of the advice out there that I read. It's not your responsibility, personally, to take the weight of the illustration world on your shoulders if you need to make a living. But it would serve you well to think about it and think about the industry long term, and to do the research into what are considered fair prices for whatever the country is you're working in. Because if a fair price range in the US is $1,000 to $1,500 for a magazine project, for example, and you quote $500 because that's still profitable for you in Indonesia, you may be inadvertently representing yourself as lower quality too. And most clients don't want to hire someone who they think is going to provide low quality work. If you can do the job for cheaper because of your location, you can give a price that's at the lower end of the usual accepted range in that country. But don't go lower than that, because then you position yourself as cheap and low quality, and it does devalue the creative work of everyone else. So I would encourage you to do the research and don't think about it like actively undercutting other creatives. You want to be on the same level as everyone else is, quality-wise, but you are allowed to use your cost of living as a competitive advantage. An illustrator living in New York or London or Berlin has plenty of advantages, which they make the most of, and maybe the only disadvantage is that their costs are high. So let's say you live in Eastern Europe and a client approaches you with a project and they say, hey, we love your work, we love what you're doing, and we think you're going to be a really great fit for this project. You take a look at the brief and they say, how much do you charge? And you say, well, how much is your budget? And they say, well, how much do you charge? And then you say, well, how much do you want to spend on it? And you're going back and forwards a couple of times like that. Fine. But then you give a price that you think is appropriate based on a market rate from data you've gathered from people like myself maybe, or the Association of Illustrators, or other illustrators. And then the client says, whoa, 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 that's too much. If I wanted to pay that, I would have just hired an illustrator from my own country. Rude. So their argument falls apart in a couple of ways, I think. If they don't have the money, that's fine. If they literally don't have a decent budget for creative work and they want to get it done cheaply, there's nothing wrong with that. Not everybody wants to spend a fortune on illustration. Fine. And you, as the illustrator, can decide based on your costs how flexible you are willing to be and where you feel comfortable setting your prices. If they can't afford that, if they can't afford what you want to charge, you can just say no. If they only want the cheapest work they can get, they can go elsewhere, right? They can go to Fiverr and hire somebody else. Or they can hire a complete beginner who doesn't charge as much, but the quality of the work is lower. The other way this argument falls down is if the client comes to you and says, we want to get this magazine cover done cheap, so we've come to you in Eastern Europe. And you say, okay, well, what's your budget? And then they say, well, usually we pay £900 or dollars or whatever it is, but we want to pay you $500 because we know what the average salary is in your country and we think this is a fair rate. And you say, right, but your budget is $900. And they say, yeah, well, usually. So you say, well, do you like my work? And they say, yeah, of course, we love it. So you say, well, pay me fairly then. And then they say, why would we pay you $900 when we could go pay someone else $500? And you live in Eastern Europe where your costs are lower. And you say, all right, well, you do have the option of hiring somebody else, but why would I, as the illustrator, want to work with a client who wants to pay me less than what the work is worth based on where I live? You're paying me for my creative skill, not my address. If the work is good, the work is good. What are they going to say to that? They don't really have a leg to stand on. In an ideal world where everyone is reasonable and treats people fairly, they would agree and they would happily pay you $900. But chances are that's not going to happen. Now, the truth is, if you live in a lower cost of living area of the world, you do have a bit more flexibility if you're working with international clients, right? But the advantage of working internationally for you is making more money. So if a client comes to you and says, we want to pay you exactly what you could earn by working with local clients in Bulgaria, then there's really no advantage for you at all. So why would you do it? Why would you choose to work with somebody who doesn't respect your creative work? I mean, after all, if they like the work, isn't that the important thing? Well, no. Not for every client, unfortunately. Some clients don't really care about the craft and the creative skill. They care about what having an illustration on their website will get them in return. More customers, more sales. They're thinking about their bottom line. Fair enough. They don't value the creativity that goes into it. They know it can be useful to them, and they just want to get it done cheap. Do you want to work with a client like that? From the client's point of view, if they're an independent author or just some solo business owner who wants to get a little bit of design work done for that business, they just want an illustration to jazz something up on their website. Maybe they want a book cover, and they just want it to be better than they could make it themselves. They've got a limited budget, and that's cool. They can find people that will do a decent job for them for cheap, but it doesn't have to be you. You can say, hey, why don't you go try Upwork or Fiverr? I guess the real question is, do you want to work with clients who only care about money, about paying the lowest price they possibly can? If times are tight and you need to make some money, Sure, you've got to do what you've got to do. But if you want to advance in your career and you want to make good money and you want to change your situation and you want to work with bigger and better clients and build yourself a really thriving creative career and be respected for your skills, you have to get used to saying no to people. Saying no to the clients who don't respect the quality of your work. Saying no to clients who only care about money. But that means actively going out there and showing your work to clients who will respect you and who will value your work and who will be happy to hire you and pay you a fair fee. Good luck.